By the end, you'll understand why introspection isn't always the direct pipeline to your mind that you think it is. So I split this talk into two parts. Today's on the limits of self-knowledge, and tomorrow will be on the potential for increasing self-knowledge. And if you watch till the end today, I'm going to give you 3 powerful ways to use what we're going to learn together today to figure out other people. Hey everyone, I'm Henry and you're watching my channel, Henry's Millions. It's day 47. And on my channel, I dive deep into psychology, philosophy, spirituality, and mind mastery, helping you unlock your personal potential and understand the forces that shape your life. All right, let's get to the puzzle of self-knowledge. Let's start with the big picture. So because of personal motives and the architecture of the mind, it's difficult for you to know yourself. That means even when we want to understand our own thoughts, feelings, and motives, there are powerful forces working against us. And now people often try to block out unwanted thoughts and feelings, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. But even more common is the simple fact that much of the mind is inaccessible to consciousness. This includes mental processes involved in perception, motor learning, personality, attitudes, and self-esteem. So why is self-knowledge so elusive? Let's break it down. And today's talk is based on a research paper titled Self-Knowledge, Its Limits, Value, and Potential for Improvement, written in 2004 by Timothy D. Wilson and Elizabeth W. Dunn. So what are the motivational limits to self-knowledge? The most commonly cited reason for our lack of self-knowledge is motivation. We're motivated to keep some thoughts and feelings outside of consciousness, usually because they're unpleasant or anxiety-provoking. And in psychoanalysis, famously argues that there is a vast repository of infantile urges that are actively kept out of our conscious awareness. And self-knowledge is said to be quite limited, though repression is usually so successful that you don't even know that it's limited. So what is repression? To actually demonstrate repression for you, 5 criteria must be met. You're motivated to keep your thoughts, feelings, or memories outside of your awareness. The attempt to keep this material out of your awareness is itself unconscious. The attempt is an unconscious process. You're not consciously doing it. That's repression. You succeed in removing the undesired material from consciousness. And after that, the material is gone, the images, the thoughts, whatever it is, they still exist in memory and continue to influence your thoughts, feelings, and behavior. It's fascinating. Now, the material is recoverable if the repressive forces are removed. So remember, when we're talking about repression, this is an unconscious process that's keeping things out of your awareness without your knowledge. Like you're simply not aware of it. Now let's talk about suppression, right? Repression first, now suppression. Suppression is different because it refers to cases where you consciously attempt to remove a thought from awareness, or you prevent yourself from expressing a thought or attitude. So suppression is conscious. Repression is, in a sense, an early defense system where material is intercepted and blocked before it even reaches your consciousness. Now, in both cases, repression and suppression, the material is kept out of your consciousness but continues to influence your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior, and it is potentially recoverable. How common is this? So it turns out people often want to keep troubling thoughts or feelings from occupying their conscious minds a lot. In fact, 99% of college students reported having attempted to suppress thoughts. I mean, that's almost everybody. In an informal survey, this was conducted by Goldberg in 1979, 1993. But here's the catch. Suppression, which is under your control, often fails it requires substantial mental resources. And if you're under cognitive load, remember we mentioned that before in a previous video, cognitive load, where you're doing other things in your mind actively. So when you're under cognitive load, suppression can backfire, increasing the accessibility of the unwanted thought. So suppression can be successful when you're not under cognitive load, when you're not figuring other things out in your mind, right? Previously suppressed material can also can continue to exert an effect on you. So repressed material, we know, exerts an effect on you, your feelings, behaviors, thoughts. So does suppressed material. Attempts to suppress a thought can produce a post-suppression rebound effect. This is interesting, and you probably have experienced this. So when you suppress a thought, there can be this, what's called a post-suppression rebound effect, where the unwanted thought comes to mind with even greater frequency after you try to suppress it. So thoughts that you've blocked out of consciousness may still influence you without your awareness. And sometimes you might never have truly forgotten certain events, but instead reclassified or redefined them in a way that you confused with having forgotten them. So interestingly, the research suggests that if people continue to engage in successful suppression, right? It's under your control, you're suppressing unwanted thoughts. If you continue to engage in that, of some unwanted thoughts, images, whatever it is, unwanted material, let's call it, like prejudice thoughts, the process can become automatic through practice. Very interesting. You do suppression enough, it can be automatic through practice. So exposure to a stimulus might trigger inhibition automatically and non-consciously. That was very interesting to know. You may have experienced this. So the bottom line here, people are commonly motivated to keep material out of their consciousness and can sometimes do so successfully in the short run, although suppression often fails as a long-term strategy. Suppressed material can potentially influence people without their awareness and has been shown to be recoverable under the right circumstances, at least in laboratory studies of relatively innocuous material. So it's less clear whether attempts to block unwanted material from the mind can be triggered unconsciously, which is the critical piece separating repression from other phenomenon. But recent research does suggest that this process can occur automatically. So we talked about motivational limits to self-knowledge, okay? Now let's shift over to non-motivational limits to self-knowledge. Remember, if you listen to the end, I'm going to give you three great tips, ways for you to figure out the truth in other people. It's not about tells. It's about getting them to be more accurate, reflect themselves more accurately. Because it's, as you will see here, sometimes it's just automatic. Sometimes we're consciously suppressing things. Sometimes it's automatic and it happens by itself. Let's continue. So the second major barrier, much of the mind is simply inaccessible to conscious awareness. And research has shown that a huge amount of mental processing happens outside of our awareness. And the mind is now seen as a collection of processing modules that operate efficiently outside of our awareness and may have existed before consciousness evolved. So these processes that we're talking about involve perception, attention, learning, evaluation, emotion, and motivation. It's a lot of processes that are going on there outside of our conscious awareness. So the adaptive unconscious now. Let's talk about that for a second. Psychologist Timothy Wilson calls these non-conscious processes, the adaptive unconscious. So he points out three main differences from the old Freudian view. Number one, mental processes are unconscious because of the architecture of the mind, not because of repression or suppression. There are no motivational forces preventing people from knowing their thoughts and feelings. Instead, much of the mind is simply inaccessible to consciousness. The second thing he said, the unconscious is much more than a repository of primitive drives. I think Freud first said that. But it's much more than that. The mind operates efficiently by relegating to the unconscious normal processes of perception, attention, learning, judgment. And these unconscious states are not recoverable through introspection. A large part of mental functioning is simply inaccessible to conscious awareness, no matter how much we introspect. You know, it's funny, like as I was researching this material, I remember, you know, for many years, so many people online were saying that, oh, well, you're only using 5% of your mind, 5% of your mind. And then they purportedly are telling you how you're going to unlock 100% of you. It's just nonsense. We have so much that's inaccessible to our awareness. So much of our cognitive processing is unconscious. It's ridiculous. The truth is, I think, you know, after many years of these people spewing this false information, you know, it became known that you're using 100% of your mind all the time. Of course, you can improve how you do things and what you're doing, but it's not like 95% of it is just shut off. Anyway, let's get back. All right, so dissociation between implicit and explicit processes. Okay, remember we were talking about the adaptive unconscious. The psychologist Wilson, he pointed out three main differences from the old Freudian view. I shared them with you. So let's look at some specific areas where this dissociation, the split between what we consciously know and what's actually driving us, right? What we consciously know and what's actually driving us, there's a split there. It's a dissociation. Let's talk about this some more. So one area where this dissociation happens, and you could be saying like, what? Dissociation? I've heard of that in psychology. It's a terrible thing and it doesn't happen with me. Relax. This is something common to everyone. And they're talking about dissociation between conscious, unconscious processes, and you'll see now. For example, in the area of personality, there are non-conscious psychological processes that determine a person's characteristic behavior and thought. There's a striking divergence between implicit and explicit measures of personality. For example, people's chronic motives, like their needs for achievement, affiliation, and power, can be measured with certain projective tests. There's like this TAT, thematic apperception test, I think. I was going through the studies. They were using this test, these methods, where they get people's impressions and reactions by staring at images or looking at others, and then they uncover more of the truth, their motives, their attitudes, and so on. So people's chronic motives, like their need for achievement, affiliation, power, can be measured with certain tests. The motives uncovered by these techniques are implicit. They're not explicit, they're implicit, meaning they don't exist at an explicit conscious level. If you have unconscious motives, you have implicit motives, reasons for doing things, not in your conscious awareness. In fact, explicit self-report measures of the same motives typically correlate at a very low level with the motives revealed by these implicit tests. Let me explain this to you. So if somebody asks you for what is your motive? What is the reason for you doing this or thinking this way? You give your explanation, and then they test you and they get an implicit motive that is different from what you said. That's what we're talking about here. Self-report measures of the same motives When you self-report, I ask you a question, why'd you do this, or something about your thoughts or feelings or attitudes, you're going to give me an answer. But then when you're tested, you come up, there's a different answer comes out. That's implicit. That's that's out of your conscious awareness. So implicit motives automatically influence behavior without conscious effort. The implicit motives within you are automatically influencing your behavior without your conscious effort. Compare that against self-attributed motives. Self-attributed motives, they guide more deliberative, effortful behaviors. So you have motives that are self-attributed. You're conscious of them. You can share them with someone else. You know why you're doing what you're doing. Those are self-attributed motives. So implicit measures of personality in other areas like dependence, attachment, explanatory style, they've been found to correlate poorly with explicit measures. What does this mean, Henry? So what's out of your conscious awareness, what's implicit, your motives behind these things related to your personality, your traits, why you're doing what you're doing, especially as it relates to dependence, attachment, explanatory style, they don't correlate too well with your explicit measures, what you're consciously aware of, what your self-attributed motives are, what you can share with me. They're not correlated very well. So there is a big difference between what's out of your conscious awareness, what's unconscious, and what you are consciously aware of. There's a big difference we're talking about. This is significant. So moving on from personality, let's talk about attitudes. Implicit attitudes are automatic responses. So there are like hybrids of automatic processes that vary, like in terms of how much conscious access you have, intentionality, controllability, and effort. So at times the attitude itself, like for example, prejudiced feelings, can exist outside of awareness. There can be a lack of awareness also of the origin of the attitude. So if you have a certain attitude, you can be probably very likely unaware of the origin of that attitude. Very interesting. And the unintentional and uncontrollable activation or expression of it when you encounter something that the attitude is related to. So many studies have found low correlations between explicit and implicit measures of attitude. That's what I really want you to understand this. Why? First, people may have only one attitude towards something, but they're often more motivated to distort or disguise the attitude when asked to report it. Like implicit measures are viewed as a way to bypass these self-presentational motives because people have less control over their responses. So you have this an attitude against someone or something, but you don't want it to be public, right? You be embarrassed or you just don't want people to know about it, and so you'll say the opposite or something else. That's what we're talking about. And second, there can be a dissociation between implicit and explicit attitudes toward the same object that you're referring to. So very interesting, because you have different systems of evaluation. All right, personality, attitude. Let's talk about self-esteem just for a little bit. Self-esteem. Implicit self-esteem is generally viewed as an efficient evaluation of the self that occurs unintentionally and without awareness, in contrast to explicit self-esteem, which is more conscious and deliberative. Remember, at the end, I'm going to show you how you can use what we're discussing today to figure other people out better. All right, so explicit self-evaluations are more likely to be concordant with implicit self-esteem when motivation and capacity to engage in deliberation are lacking. So I'm going to explain this more. For example, when self-judgments are made quickly or under cognitive load. So we're talking here, in other words, about explicit self-evaluations. Evaluate yourself explicitly in a way that you can consciously assess and communicate. It's more in line with your implicit self-esteem, that's out of your awareness, maybe I don't know if we want to say unconscious, just out of your awareness, out of your conscious thought. So explicit and implicit self-evaluations, they can look more alike when your motivation and your capacity to engage are not optimal. They're lacking. When would that happen? When you make quick self-judgments or you're under cognitive load, right? When someone has got a lot going on in their mind, they are not going to be as active or energetic with regards to filtering, suppressing, things like that, right? Cognitive load. Also, when you get fast answers out of people, they have less time to think about what they want to say and how they want to say it. Okay. They've done all kinds of studies, interesting, like favoritism for name letters. It disappears when participants are asked their reasons for liking the letters, and suggests that deliberation steers people away from the immediate intuitive response. So when people have to think about why they did something, why they picked a name or a word or whatever in a test, when they think about it, the reason or knowledge of it just disappears. So deliberation steers people away from their immediate intuitive response. Implicit and explicit measures of self-esteem predict distinct types of behavior. For example, during an interview about emotional health, participants' self-reported anxiety was related to their explicit self-esteem, whereas they had nonverbal anxiety as rated by the interviewer, and that was related to the implicit self-esteem. So you can observe someone, you could kind of see some anxiety from them that would be based on implicit factors, implicit value of self-esteem, but they could say something different based on their own explicit measures. So the takeaway from today's talk, we've got a little bit more. You're gonna like it. Why self-knowledge is so hard. Research on perception, motor learning, personality, attitudes, self-esteem reveals a frequent discord between implicit and explicit measures of your internal states. Oh my God, that sounds like a whole lot of relax. There are several reasons for what I just said, this discord between the implicit and explicit measures. People, including people's desire to distort their attitudes. People have a desire to distort their attitudes on explicit measures because they have concerns with self-presentation. But this discord has been found even in discordance. I'm trying to make it short, but then it means something else. This discordance has been found even in domains where self-presentational concerns are low. So even where people are not as concerned or embarrassed or afraid of what others are going to think, still there's this difference between implicit and explicit measures. So there's a lot of evidence that implicit measures often tap mental processes that are non-conscious and inaccessible to introspection. You can't even introspect about this stuff. You can't reflect, you can't introspect. It was great. That was great to find out, because when we sit here, we're going to say, I'm going to reflect, I'm going to introspect. It's almost as if like we're thinking, we've got full access to the mind there. It's not the case at all. So can you use this information to figure out others? Interesting. Well, Henry, that's the only use for what you've just been talking about today. All right. I'm glad. All right, you can absolutely use this, the science of knowledge, self-knowledge limits, to better understand others, often more accurately than they understand themselves. Here's how the research and expert practice support your 3 strategies, along with some caveats, okay? Number one, don't completely trust what someone says about themselves. Explicit self-reports are often unreliable because people may be motivated to hide, distort, or simply lack access to their true motives, their feelings or attitudes. So they're motivated to distort them, or they just simply lack access to them. Much of our mental life is non-conscious and inaccessible, even to ourselves. So implicit motives and attitudes, they often drive behavior without conscious awareness. And even self-reports, when people self-report, it may reflect like the personal theories or social desirability rather than their actual internal states. Practical tip here. Take what people say about themselves as one data point. That's great. Just take it as one data point. You're the researcher, so you ask someone a question, you just met somebody new, you want to learn more about someone, they tell you something, take it as one data point. I love that. One data point. But look for patterns in their behavior, in their choices, and their reactions for deeper insights. Lessons learned. Number two, get others to talk about their impressions of ideas, images, or people. Get them to talk about their impressions of ideas, images, or people. Not about themselves, their impressions of something else. Projective and indirect techniques is what it is, like asking for stories about ambiguous images or their impressions of others, can reveal implicit motives and attitudes that your person may not be able or willing to articulate directly. For example, the TAT, what I told you earlier about the thematic apperception test, it asks people to interpret pictures. Their narratives of those pictures often reveal their underlying motives, achievement, power, affiliation that may not match what they're reporting, their self-reports. Social perception research shows that people's impressions of others are shaped by their own motives and unconscious biases. So asking about their reactions to third parties or situations can expose hidden aspects of their personality. I just light up when I'm reading or talking about things like this. This is great stuff. Tonight or this weekend, you're going to figure somebody out. Practical tip here. Use open-ended questions about scenarios, images, or third parties to surface patterns that reflect the person's implicit motives or attitudes. Okay? Use open-ended questions about scenarios, images, or third parties to surface these patterns that reflect their inner motives or attitudes. That's great. All right, the third tip. Increase cognitive load while asking questions. We've talked about this today and in previous videos. Increasing cognitive load. Keep them busy so they can't focus on what they're trying to do. Let me explain this to you. Lying and self-presentation, they require mental effort. Somebody wants to lie. They want to express their self-image. Self-presentation requires mental effort. When people are under cognitive load, like asked to answer quickly, maintain eye contact, or recall events in reverse order, it becomes harder to fabricate or suppress information. And research shows that liars, or those trying to hide something, have a harder time maintaining the stories under cognitive load, leading to more detectable inconsistencies or longer response times. The practical tip here, Henry, get to the good stuff. All right. In conversations that you may have with others, you can gently increase their cognitive load by asking unexpected or detailed questions, by requesting that stories be told in reverse order. Oh, that's great. I've never done that before. I'm going to try that. Or by having the person maintain eye contact while answering. That's great. So what does this all mean for you today? It means that self-knowledge is fundamentally limited, not just because we sometimes avoid unpleasant truths, but because much of our mind is simply out of reach. But don't let that discourage you. Understanding these limits can help you approach self-reflection, personal growth, and even your relationships with a bit more humility and curiosity. So given the limits to self-knowledge that we've reviewed today, in what ways can people seek to know themselves better? How can you know yourself better given the limits we've discussed today? For the answer to that, you'll have to subscribe to be notified of tomorrow's talk, because tomorrow we're going to discuss ways in which self-knowledge, your self-knowledge, can be increased. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe for part 2 on self-knowledge tomorrow. Thanks. Every time.